Hi, Caravan ladies. We're working on Melissa Oak's Two at a Time Toe-Up Socks, and I am just finishing up the last of the stitching before I begin the heel cup, and I'm working across the second sock, sock B, with my original number of stitches on the front. I've already done the other sock, and I am almost to the end of the second front sock. So I'll finish that up, and I have 26 stitches on each segment on these socks, and on the back I have 52 stitches, so it's double what I have on the front. And there's the last couple stitches, and I'm going to turn my work, flip my yarn over. Sorry, I bumped the music stand that's holding the camera up, and I'm ready. I'm going to grab a marker and just put it on the cable between the segments of the second sock so that as I work on the first one, I can push this one all the way down and not worry about losing where the middle is. And I'm going to push my cable through, and I'm ready to start on the heel cup. And if you look at the instructions, she tells you to work across half of the stitches that would make up the front. I'm working from the Tuscany pattern on page 64 of the book. The pattern is a different number of stitches than what I've had, so I've done the math and figured out how to divide that up a little differently. But essentially, if you look at on page 64, side 2, row 1, right side, it says knit for the small 15 stitches. That's based on a 30-stitch sock. So she's knitting half of the original width. So I'm going to knit 13 because my socks were 26 stitches wide. So I'll do that first. Remember to snug up after the first couple stitches. And I'm going to stop talking so I can count here. And there's my 13. And then she says to put a marker there. So I'm going to grab a marker and put it on my needle, my right needle. And then the next number that she gives is one less than the original number of stitches. She says 29 for a 30-stitch sock. I'm going to do 25 for my 26-inch sock. Dropped one, fix that. And that's 25, and I'm going to place marker number 2. Oh, I'm going to slip one. I'm going to bring the yarn forward to wrap it, place the needle back on the other side, and then I'm going to put marker number 2 on here. I should have done that before I put the stitch back over there. So there's marker number 2. There's my wrapped stitch, and I'm going to turn it around, and I'm going to work from the inside of the sock now. Okay, so now we're on side 2, row 2, the wrong side, and I'm going to purl to 1 stitch before the marker. The rows will get shorter and shorter as I go. These are called short rows with a wrapped stitch on the end. The wrap gives the stitch a little bit of extra body to fill in the little gap that forms as we work this when we come back to it later. There's my marker. her a couple stitches away. This was the last step that we did at Shipshi. Okay, I am at 1 stitch before the marker. So I'm going to slip that stitch and I'm going to wrap it. Bring the stitch over to the left needle, wrap the yarn back around to the purl side, and I'm going to turn my work. Then I'm going to knit to 2 stitches before the last wrapped stitch. The shape that's forming in the stockinette stitch area, right where my left thumb is the curved part at the end of the bottom of the foot towards the heel. So this is curving around to taper into the gentle curve of the heel base. And I'm going to stop 2 stitches before the previously wrapped stitch. So this one here, I'm pointing with my left thumb now, is the wrapped stitch. You can see the little bean around it. Just kind of looks like what you get when you do the knit front and back increase. And I'm stopped 2 stitches before, and I'm going to slip, wrap, and pass back over. Put the yarn to the back again. I'm sorry for the bumping around. I have the camera on a music stand and I'm looking through it. It's working, sort of, so I hope. And I just slid off of my loop here. There we go. And now I'm going to step side 2, row 4, the wrong side. I'm going to purl to 2 stitches before the previously wrapped stitch. So I'm going to go across. You can see the gaps forming with pairs of 2 stitches. Trying to keep this over where you can see it from the camera. I keep forgetting that the camera's not in the middle of the phone. It's on one end. Okay, there's my wrapped stitch here, and I'm going to wrap the one 2 stitches before it, so that's the third to the last one. Bring the yarn back around, and I'm going to turn my work again. And I'm going to keep working that way until I have 4 stitches left. So I'm going to pause it now for just a moment. Okay, I'm almost there. I've got just a little more to do here. I have an odd multiple of 2 stitches on my segments of my sock, so I'm going to have 6 stitches left instead of 4. So I'm just finishing that up now. I want to end up on the purl side. That should be the last side that I work on. There's my wrap for my last knit row. So the pattern says 4 stitches. Realize that if you shorten that, you'll be shortening the length of your sock by 2 rows. So decide if that's going to make a significant difference. And I am ending up here. I'm wrapping my last stitch, and I'm going to turn my work. Okay, so I am now at, oh, I do have 4 stitches, look at that. So it came out just fine. You can see all of the pairs of stitches along the needle on both sides. I've got 2, 2, 2, 2, and 2, and then I've got my 4 unworked stitches and my last wrapped stitch. So I'm on the knit side, and I'm now at the point where it says for women small only, and I'm going to use that instruction. It says knit 3 stitches and slip 1 as if to purl and wrap the stitch. So that's my last row of work here. 1, 2, and 3. So this is going to put 2 wrapped stitches next to each other, and that's okay, because that's what she said to do. Okay, so there's that wrapped stitch, and I'm going to turn my work. I'm now on the page 65 where it says working the heel flap. So notice now that we're side 2 row 1 is now the wrong side, so the even and odd rows have switched sides at this point in the process. So the first row of the heel flap is going to be worked on the wrong side, and it says to purl, lifting the wraps and purling them together with their respective stitches as you come to them. So here's what that's going to look like. I've got my working yarn in my right hand, and I'm going to purl till I come to a wrapped stitch. And remember, I have 2 next to each other here on this first row, but they're over here, so never mind that. Okay, so there's my purled stitches, and here's my first wrapped stitch. I'm going to lift from the back up onto the needle, and then I'm going to purl 2 together. Okay, and I'm going to purl the next stitch, and then I'm going to lift the wrapped stitch up and purl the 2 together. Knit 1, or purl 1, sorry. Lift the wrap, put it on the needle, pick up the 2 and purl them together. Purl 1, lift the wrap, purl the 2 together until I have 1 stitch left, and that's a wrapped stitch. And then this is the one that's a little tricky. I'm going to lift the wrap, put it on here, and I'm going to slide both of those loops over to the right needle, remove the marker. This is the part where you need 3 hands. I'm going to set the marker down, and then slide those 2 back over to the left needle and purl all 3 together. This is a P3TOG, or purl 3 together, and then I'm going to turn the work. Okay, row 2 is the right side now, and it tells me to slip 1 as if to purl, so I'm going to insert the needle, the right needle from the right side of the stitch, just slip it across there, and I'm going to knit across, and when I get to the wraps, I'm going to lift them up onto the left needle before I knit, and knit them together with the stitch they accompany. Almost there. One more. Okay, and here's my wrapped stitch. I'm going to lift this up, and I'm going to get the 2 loops on there together. Then I'm going to knit that together. And this is where I had the 2 wrapped stitch next to each other. So I'm going to lift those up, and I'm going to do that twice in a row. And then I'm going to continue on down the slope of the heel. You can see these rows are shorter, longer, 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 all the way across. Each time that I have that wrapped stitch, I'm going to lift the horizontal bit over onto the needle with the stitch, and I'm going to knit them together. So you have to pass them back and forth a little bit to get them to go where you want them, but they'll get there. Okay, and then I'm going to continue until I have 1 stitch before the marker. Lift this last wrap, take 1 more stitch, and now it's going to tell me that I am supposed to lift the wrap and slip it with the stitch over to the other needle, remove the marker just like we did on the purl row, slide those 2 back over to the left needle, and then knit the 3 together. Do you see the little gap here, right here? There's a gap, and I want to knit the 2 stitches that are the wrap and the stitch plus the next stitch on the other side of the gap, and that's going to close up the gap. Except I caught too much of something there. There we go. Okay, so that's the end of the row. Now I'm going to turn it, and I've worked all of my wrapped stitches, so I'm going to purl back. I'm going to slip 1 first and purl back to the other side until 1 before the gap. Takes a little bit of time to work across. You'll notice that the little cup shape is starting to form here where we've made that heel cup. That's where the back of the heel wraps around and becomes the heel flap. I don't know why they call it that, although if you knit top down, you actually make a flap and then pick up stitches along the edges of it. Okay, I'm at one before the gap. You can clearly see the gap there, and I'm going to purl two together. And I'm going to turn my work. Okay, row 3. That was row 3. This is row 4, the right side. Now this is where we start to do the what looks like ribbing on the back of the heel. I'm going to slip one and knit one, and I'm going to do that all the way across. So here's how it looks. Slip one, knit one, 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 slip one, knit one. I should be coming up to the gap soon. Slip one, and there's the gap, and I'm going to knit two together. So I did a slip one before the two together, and then I'm going to turn it. Make sure as you do the slips that you don't pull the yarn too tight. You need to leave a little bit of extra there so that it can continue to lay flat and not pull in as you're working. So you're going to see these longer stitches on the back of your work. It's a little hard to see against the gold needle, but there's the longer stitch. That's where the slip is. And if your colors are changing, you'll see the colors are alternating between the color before it and the new color. So I happen to be hitting this where there's a brown stripe in my yarn. So now I'm going to purl, and I'm going to purl all the way across, and I'm just going to purl those slip stitches as if they were regular stitches, and ignore the little bar of yarn that's on the back of the work there. The yarn, that adds a little bit of cushioning in the back of the heel where it rubs against the shoe and helps with wear. I don't know any other reasons why they do it this way. It does pull it in a little bit and give a little bit of flexibility to the fit at the back of the heel on the sock. So I'm working across, and I'm going to do all the rest of my rows like this until I'm back to my original number of stitches, which in this case for me is 26. In the pattern in the book on page 64 and 65, you would be back to 30 stitches. Here's the end with the gap. I'm going to close the gap, and I'm going to turn it. Now as I work, if you count, you'll see how many stitches you have on each side, and every row you're going to be picking up one more stitch off of that side section, so it's gradually going to consume all of those extra stitches and bring you back to your original number. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to slip, knit, slip, knit, slip, knit, and I'm going to continue like that all the way across until I've finished. I'm not going to bore you with watching me knit 30 rows of all of this. We'll see how well I can talk and knit at the same time, huh? So I'll finish up with this row and the accompanying purl row, and then I'll pause it and finish this and come back to it when I'm done, or close to done. Okay, there's the end. You can see a little bit of a ridge forming here where you're running into the stitches that are now perpendicular to what the stitches that you're working. I'm going to turn this again, and I'm going to slip, and I'm going to purl back to the other side, and then I'm going to pause the recorder for a minute and finish this. The yarn's getting tangled up on me here. Stop to untangle. There's the two with the gap in the middle. I'm going to purl them together. It's pretty hard to miss that spot. And I'm going to turn, and you can see I have one less stitch here, and I also have one less stitch on the other side. So I'm going to pause this, and I'm going to finish working this, and I'll come back to you when I am on about the next to the last row. Okay, you can see I'm about 4 rows from being finished here, and I wanted to just point out a couple things before I go on. As you're looking at the ribs that form as you do the knit one slip one, you'll see that the stitches in the ridges that stand out are actually 2 rows high, and if you look in between them, you'll see 2 stitches in between those. The first one, of course, is the slipped stitch that's creating that line against the perpendicular stitches of the heel flap, or the gusset, where it's going to roll around the foot. So your foot's actually going to sit in this much like this, and that's how it's going to lay out. So you can see how that's forming there. That's the same idea, that slip one, of pulling up the loose end of the last stitch of the previous row that you would use on the edge of a sweater panel or anything else that you're knitting. You see that instruction often to slip the first stitch and then continue the knitting across the row. So I'm going to finish up my last few rows here. I can't think of any other pearls of wisdom to impart, so I'm going to pause again so that I can finish this, and I'll come back to you when I'm on my next to the last row. Okay, I'm down to my last 2 rows. I'm on the purl side right now. I've got 1 gap at this end and with 1 stitch, and I've got 1 stitch left before the gap on the other side. So I'm going to work this row the same as the others, but when I get to the end, I'm going to do something a little odd that I want you to see. And that's a thing that's not in your book. So this is the extra value added, hopefully. And I hope that seeing this worked in video form, I just realized I'm not up where you can see. Seeing it worked in video form, you'll be able to play it back if you need to, so that you can see exactly how to do this as you're working on your socks. I'm coming up to my single stitch that's left. I've got 3 stitches left to knit, and then here's my gap before the last stitch. I'm going to close the gap and do that stitch, but then I'm going to pick up 1 extra stitch. Just pick up a loop and work it like a regular stitch there, and that's going to help prevent a problem that you have sometimes with a little hole appearing at the intersection of the gusset and the heel flap. Then I'm ready to go on my last row. I'm going to knit that 1 stitch, and then I'm going to slip like usual and knit across. So I've maintained the pattern of the stripes. There's a neat variation of this that's called Eye of Partridge, and they reverse the knits and slips on every other row, so that you do 1 row, slip 1, knit 1, and you do 1 row, knit 1, slip 1. And it creates a really nice texture that looks like bird's eye weave, like old diapers, and I suppose there are other things that are woven that way, but that's the thing that comes to mind. It makes a pretty texture, but I think it's a little harder to see what you're doing with it, so it's easy to lose your place in it. There's my last gap to close. I did it wrong. I'll do it again. There we go. And again, I'm going to pick up 1 extra stitch in here, and I'm just going to pick up a lower loop. I'm looking for the last 2 bars here in between the pieces of the work, and I'm just going to make, like with a crochet hook, like you would pick up a stitch and loop it around, and I've created 1 extra stitch that way on each end, and I'm going to get rid of that as I start working the legs, but it helps to close up that potential hole that you can get sometimes at that joint. Okay, there's my heel flap. It's done, and I'm ready to go on to the leg. But before I can go on to the leg on this sock, I need to go over to my other sock and do exactly the same thing that I've just done. Build the heel cup and then work on the heel flap. Add those extra 2 stitches at the end of the process, and then you'll be ready to go on to the legs. I hope this is helpful. Let me know.